What is going on, people? Welcome back to another special episode of the Uncensored Critic podcast. Thank you so much for joining me again for another episode with another very, very special guest. And of course, it's another one from the GSA group, and it's Andrew Davidson. And let's take a little moment to introduce Andrew. Andrew is an Australian theatre practitioner and musician. He is a teaching fellow in acting and musical theatre at the Guildford School of Acting and is GSA's Wellbeing Champion. Andrew is a graduate of Australia's National Institute of Dramatic Art, NIDA, and has directed plays, operas, musicals, and cabaret. He studied composition at the University of Sydney and has written scores for drama, musical theatre, and dance. As head of dramatic art at the Australian Institute of Music, Andrew established the Bachelor of Performance degree. As a music educator, he is a qualified teacher of Dalcroze Eurythmics and Caudalie musicianship. I probably pronounced that wrong, so do forgive me. As a freelance musician, Andrew also plays piano for ballet and contemporary dance. As a researcher, he has presented at conferences and workshops internationally. He is the program leader on the Bachelor of Honours Theatre program, as well as Wellbeing Champion for GSA. His qualifications include Master of Music from Longley College School of Bard College from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Postgraduate Diploma of Dramatic Arts from the National Institute of Dramatic Arts, Sydney, Postgraduate Diploma in Music from University of Sydney, Bachelor of Arts from University of New South Wales, Sydney, and Bachelor of Music First Class Honours from the University of South Wales, Sydney. His affiliations and memberships including he's a fellow at the Royal Society for the Arts and a member of Stage Directors UK. Throughout his career, he's been involved in many projects, including work on plays such as All My Sons, Everybody's Talking About Jamie, Fiddler on the Roof, The Glass. How do you say that word again, Andrew? I know we just talked about that.
The Glass
Menagerie. The Glass Menagerie. I had it in my head, it was gone. Hedda Gabler, The Heidi Chronicles, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Rabbit Hole, The Taming of the Shrew, and The Women of Troy. As head of dramatic arts at the Australian Institute of Music, he co-wrote and led the Bachelor of Performance degree program. He taught modules in performance skills, performance practice, and contextual studies. He directed productions including Before and After, The Laramie Project, The Liaison Dangereux, On the Razzle, Playhouse Creatures, Women of Troy, and The Who's Tommy. And last but by no means least, he has two publications out. One is called Konstantin Stanislavsky and Emile Jacques Dalcroze, Historical and Pageological Connections Between Act Training and Music Education, and The Cycle of Creativity, a case study of the working relationship between a dance teacher and a dance musician in a ballet class, both published in 2011, so go and get your copies now. So, my goodness, what a wealth of stuff you have under your belt, my friend.
Thanks, Ollie. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, I mean, that's an incredible set of stuff that you've done. I mean, I still haven't heard you play the piano yet. You still owe me and my group at GSA that privilege. So yeah, one thing that I sort of like to sort of kick off on this podcast is to discover the beginning. So to begin at the beginning, as Dylan Thomas says, where did it all start for you? Where did the inspiration to be involved in the arts and indeed with music, where did it start? Where did it come from?
I grew up with it. My family were involved. My grandfather, he sang and he played piano and the organ. That's my mum's dad. And then mum was always a singer and an actor. She was interested in being on stage for the music, but also for the broader performance. And so I think she met my dad when he was more of a lighting technician, I think. He was doing electrics on things, and then eventually he went into audio because he found the sound side of everything fascinating, sound installation, live sound. So as a family, we kind of were around theatres all the time, whether it was community theatre, pro-am, there was operetta, mum was in the chorus of operettas, and an opera company that was a touring company in Sydney when I was very little. And in all of that world, I got on the piano at a very young age. I got to do some stage work when I was about 7. And at a certain point, there were people like drama teachers and speech teachers who were around, voice teachers that kind of said, "Yeah, this is an interesting person. Let's have him along to our drama club, or let's do some private lessons once a week." So this was true of the piano teachers I had and of the theatre teachers. And so I did grow up with a lot of this. And I remember sitting in rehearsal rooms night after night, week after week, depending on where the context was. And it was a thing to be dragged around to stuff. And I do recall when I was very small, maybe I was about 4 years old, I was being driven away from a second dress rehearsal by my grandparents because it was time for me to go home. And I was standing on the back seat of the car, and I was banging on the window because I wanted to stay for the second dress rehearsal. So I was obviously a theatre child from very early on.
Oh, I can't imagine that. You'd be like, you're so immersed in that moment in the rehearsal room. It's like they're doing all kinds of magic, and you get that tap on your shoulders like, come on, time to go now, so let's go home. And you're like, no, just five more minutes, and being dragged away. But no, I completely, I think we've all sort of had that moment in the rehearsal room where you sort of experience just pure magic, and you want to just sample as much of that as you can. I suppose really it's a bit of a difference. Is there kind of a difference to discovering that spark when it comes to actors working on plays, or is it actors working on, singers more importantly working on musicals or cabaret? But I suppose you can still find sparks of brilliance in both of them. It's just like one is kind of in a more sort of decorative realm when it comes to and there's music and there's atmosphere and everything else in between. Whereas with, you have to find the magic in the words when it comes to plays. Is that a fair description, or is there kind of everything sort of bonds together to create this wonderful thing known as the arts that we know?
Yeah, I guess it's the whole experience is really important. The thing that I learned early on in my childhood was the integration of song, dance, scene. I loved musical theatre when I was very young, and that was where I got all of my sort of creative impulse from. I think I know probably most about American history or culture from musicals, and I know an enormous amount of quite random stuff about the world from having spent that time in the theatre. And maybe that's where the fact that an actor has to be interested in everything, that's where it comes from. So I do remember a turning point in my teens when I watched plays that were not musicals, that didn't have any song or dance in them, and that was new for me. And it was so powerful, the idea that speaking actors could make me feel as intensely as singing and dancing actors. And so I never have given music away, and I've never given away that link between the two things. But the thing that I've been driven towards, and this happened a little later in my studying career as a student, I made the decision that I wanted to train as a theatre director because of text, because I wanted to get deeply into what is it to unpack a play, because the writer's our great teacher at drama school. The words, as you say, Dylan Thomas, love the words. That it is something in an artist's imagining that happens. I would say, it takes 10 years for a good play to fully cook. But the first ideas that playwright has are simply they're brewing at a very low level, and the characters sit for a long time, and the scenarios sit, and they develop, and eventually the words start to come to the writer. And so I think what our job is, because we don't have 10 years to do it as actors and directors, is to sit with the play for our 6-week, 4-week, 2-week rehearsal period, however long the budget allows, and to get as deeply into a kind of reverse engineering of that process. So we have to take the play apart a bit like a beautiful new car that we've bought, but we pull it apart and we look at the components of it, we see how they work, and then we put it back together. And in some way, it doesn't go back exactly as it came out of the shop, because our job is 50%. The writer gives us half of the creative experience. And then it's our job as creative people, as actors, as directors, designers, to reshape that in our own interpretation with enormous respect for what's there on the page.
Oh, massively, yeah. Because one thing that I remember from our first day working on Rabbit Hole, when we sort of did like the read through all around, in a circle, and I loved how you were very, very specific about every time there was a beat in the line or there was a pause, you would always say, and now there's a beat, and now there's a pause, now there's a beat, now there's a pause, and we're there to, and it's funny because in that rehearsal process, you discover the power of what is being said when nothing is being said at all, and of course that's the writer's ambition for that in a way. And so that sort of brings me on to sort of the first question today, is like, so when an actor is in the rehearsal room, and do forgive me, I know from all this experience you gave us through the Rabbit Hole days, but I think for anyone watching or listening who's interested in what to do on the very first day or the first task to get that discovery process going when they get a script for the first time, what would you say was the very first thing that they should look at? What's the very first thing they should be doing?
Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, as you say, the play we worked on, Rabbit Hole, which is David Lindsay-Abaire, here is a play that's been written in the last 15 years. You'll be looking at contemporary people in middle-class America, not yet middle-aged people. So you've got a context there. These are people who have a young family. So immediately we're looking at context. But what I love about having a new text in the room, no matter what it is to treat it almost like an archaeologist would. Even if it's a new play, it's an artifact. It comes from a culture, it comes from a time, and to understand the context of that. And the best way to start, of course, is to begin reading for meaning. And that, for me, is the most important thing about the first read of any play. Even if you're reading Hamlet again, read for the first time for meaning. So you're really giving the author, giving the writer, as I said earlier, you're giving them the respect of spending the time dwelling on their words, on their choices. It doesn't mean that you have to read particularly slowly. But what you mustn't bring is, oh, yes, I know this play. Oh, yes, I've seen a dozen film versions of it. And I'll just bring in all my preconceptions, and I'll just jump in with a whole lot of assumptions. And I kind of go, well, that's not very respectful, to the author, but it's also not very respectful to your own creativity, because what if you discover things that you knew nothing about? Exactly. Why would you put yourself in this kind of cliched position when you first do that first read? The table read, as it's known, is such an important moment. And first day of rehearsal can be, oh gosh, in some theatre companies, it's almost a performance. But if you're the rookie in that theatre company, if you're the new person on the block, don't try and perform, because all the old hands, they'll be trying to outdo one another. They'll have done dozens of shows together. They'll have all their in-jokes. But for the recent graduate actor who's first off the blocks, first show off the blocks, you want to show that you can lift words off the page, you can read well and use your instrument, use your voice. You can use your imagination in the moment. Now, they may have sent you the script before, but you don't want to make a lot of assumptions. You're lifting the words off the page with respect for the writer, and you're listening to the other actors. This is really important. Your own reading of the play is one thing, but listening to the other scenes, piecing together, a bit like a detective, as I said, it's like an archaeologist. What is this artifact? What have I found? Where does it fit in the world? And how does it speak to my own experience and creativity?
Yeah, and that's really cool, because I often sort of get caught in this trap of, say, because I love the play The Crucible. I know we were talking about it just before we came on, by Arthur Miller, obviously, and it was, I've seen the 2014 version of from the old Vic with Richard Armitage and Adrian Schiller, who's been on the show. I've watched it so many times because it's such a beautiful version of that play, directed by Yael Farber, and everyone who's just a queen of directing. And and funny enough, I did the Crucible sort of like, it was my first kind of local gig after I did my degree. And I brought a lot of that experience of that show like with me into the space. And I thought, I've seen it, I know what to do. I listened to Yael Farber, I've watched Yael Farber do it. That's the best way, that's the only way to do it, which I know it isn't. And it has brought a lot of that into the room. But it was helpful. But now, having sort of been through what we've been through, finding your own interpretations into things, bring that into the room. Yes, Richard Armitage did it very well. Yes, Yael Farber did well, but that's their version. Sadly, we weren't a part of it. It's time for us to find our version and sort of bring it forward in a way. And so, what would you say was part of the rehearsal process which you should leave until that you don't have to rush into that particular aspect straight away? Obviously, you learn your lines and you get a figure of the context first, but what part of the rehearsal process should you not be sort of rushing towards to like right away? Is like in terms of like making gesture choices or character choices, what would you say was something that developed rather than you should be rushing to?
I always say, don't try and do opening night. I mean, that's the most dangerous thing, is that in the rehearsal room, your focus is on opening night. It can't be, or it shouldn't be. Of course, there's some forms of performance where it has to be. Like if you're doing, I don't know, a gala concert as a musical theatre performer and it's on tomorrow night, you've got to think, how can I get through this material quickly? I've got to learn a harmony for the ensemble bit. I know what my solos are. And, of course, there is a pragmatism to that. But if you're in a 6-week rehearsal process, day one, the last thing you want to start with is opening night. You want to allow the discoveries that come from working with the play, working with your colleagues in the room, allowing those magical moments of unexpected stuff to suddenly appear. And that takes a lot of trust, and it does take a lot of calm sense of who you are in the rehearsal room. I think possibly that's one of the biggest challenges when a young actor is studying, because we get that feeling of a slightly angsty feeling of, if I don't do it all now, how will I ever prove that I can succeed?
Wow. Yeah.
And that's understandable. But it's what we often say. If somebody does go into training and has to, sometimes they will, you find that people were offered either the course of their dreams or the role of their dreams, and then they say, "Can I give up the role in order to do the studying?" Well, the answer is the roles will still be there, the shows will still be there, the plays, the films will still be looking for actors, even after you've gone away for 3 years to train, and you'll be better for it. So I think the same thing is true for the rehearsal period, is that we don't want to second guess what the outcome's going to be until we get to that point where we have to start making some pragmatic choices. So be brave early in the process would be my advice. Be courageous about making discoveries.
Yeah.
And also, as I've said, about honouring the playwright, the writer, is to have respect for traditions. And I think that's one of the things that keeps coming up, is this balance between brave innovation. It's a kind of research, if you like, that you're in the rehearsal room saying, I don't know what's going to happen here, but as a good researcher, I think the best research, the quality research, is where you step in not knowing. You don't go in with a theory. You don't step in with some question that you think you're going to answer. You actually go in, it's what they call in research circles, they call this an inductive approach, because you don't know, you don't have a research question. Here I step into Arthur Miller's text, and I don't know what questions are going to arise, and I don't know how I'm going to solve them yet. The director, presumably, has done a lot of that work prior to the process starting. So that's a conversation as well. So there's a a kind of back and forth there. There's a conversation that happens in the room. But for the actor to have made a whole lot of, I keep saying in classes, don't put your homework on stage, because you end up bringing stale choices from yesterday or 2 weeks ago. You do the homework, of course, but when you're in the moment, in the rehearsal, in the scene, you have to deal with what's actually there and trust that all that other work that you've brought on board is going to support you.
Yeah, that's great. And I think another sort of a colleague of yours, Don Rouse, also at GSA, is interested in finding the naturalism on stage, just the thought of being observed and finding the comfort in that. Just like, so to say, like you've done all your work, you know all your lines, and now just have that ability just to be present and just to be calm and just allow the work to come naturally as a result. Another thing I discovered from you was the memorization process, which you talked about. I think you called it a mechanical memorization process of learning the lines, where you wrote just your part down and you just learn it like with no emotion, just like a drilling of just getting all the words in your head, and then the emotion comes later. And I found it particularly beneficial because like the words were all there, and then and like I said, the emotion sort of came later. So how would you describe that process and how beneficial it is to actors?
Yeah, it's a discovery that I made through working on Meisner technique. And Sanford Meisner, who was one of the great American acting teachers throughout the 20th century, one of the points here was a little like, it connects into one of my other areas of interest, which is playing piano for ballet class. Imagine that they would be connected, but they are. When a person is in the physical requirements of something like ballet, it, to me, is a complete analogy for what an actor is in terms of the requirements for the text. So mechanical is a tough word because as a musician, I like things to be automatic. I don't want the performance to be mechanical.
Yeah, sure.
But there are some mechanics in the body and in the brain and in the voice, etc., which need to be dealt with. The point is that stuff that's on the page from that playwright has to come out of you, whether you like it or not. In the same way that the body of the dancer has to know the steps, has to understand what is the sequence that's required of me through this ballet exercise. And that sequential sense is, in effect, mechanical. It's a list of stuff that I have to do. Now, if the dancer dances mechanically, we get nothing expressive out of it. But there is a point in every artist's experience, same for me as a pianist, as a musician. I know that there are particular mechanizations, automatisms in my body that I have to be able to do in order to produce the music. What I don't want to be doing at the keyboard is thinking, what's the next note? What's the next chord? Because that will stop me having the flow in the expression of the music. That's where my goal needs to be. So what I have to do to memorize the piece, whether it's the dance steps, the music at the keyboard, the actor in the scene, I have to have this slightly mechanized process of knowing, can I speak all of my character's words from the beginning of the play to the end of the play without having to do too much thinking about what's next? Because my thinking should be on, what do I want? Yeah. How are you behaving? How have you just spoken to me? Why are you picking up that glass? Why have you turned the door handle and you're going to leave? All of those things are far more important to me than trying to remember what's my next line. So for a young actor early in training, one of these things to understand is how important it is to be able to swallow, digest the whole play and just be able to bring it out of you when it's needed. So the process you described, we would write by hand our own lines, almost like a monologue, and it just goes on and on and on. And each time another character speaks, we just put a / so we know visually on the page somebody else has something to say. But at this point, that doesn't matter. I'm not going to learn the other character's lines. I'm just writing my lines. And there is a brain science thing which probably Meisner was not aware of at the time he was teaching. But Arthur Miller used to do this as well with Shakespeare. Arthur Miller would sit with Shakespeare's plays and just copy them out, which as a writer is a good learning tool. What did this other writer do? But it's a physical thing that we do by writing it out in our own handwriting. We're working our brain in a different way. And we couldn't know this if we didn't have brain science to study what goes on. But obviously Meisner intuited this. He knew that it was a useful practice to do this. A little like when a musician writes out a score. The composer Benjamin Britten used to do this with Bach. He would sit and rewrite Bach because he just wanted to learn what has this other composer done. And so again, it comes back to this respect for the words. So we're not trying to be mechanical because the words don't matter. We're trying to be mechanical because, boy, do they matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have to say, I just want to throw it in now. Benjamin Britten writing out Bach. That's probably the best music he ever wrote, and it wasn't his. As you can probably tell, I'm not a fan. So, oh dear. But that brings me on to possibly one of the main topics I want to talk to you about today, which is, of course, the work of Sanford Meisner. And you sort of just spoke about him just now. But how would you describe his technique and how? And you know, I know full well just how helpful it is to actors. But again, like the memorization process, how did he create his technique, and how should actors reap the benefits of his work?
Yeah, I find Meisner interesting, and I stumbled on why I found him interesting. I was immersed in some work about 20 years ago, where I was a musical director on a piece of theatre that had actors doing certain exercises that were being referred to as Meisner. I thought, this is interesting. But because I was on the music side of the production, I wasn't dealing directly with the actors. And then probably about 10 years ago, some Meisner work was happening in a course that I was teaching on. And again, I was coming back to the vocabulary, so it interested me. And eventually I decided, look, if I want to understand this, I have to drop myself in as an actor into some training and get to understand. And so I would say it's been 7 or 8 years now that I've just been immersing myself more and more into this work. And the thing that I stumbled on was how important listening is to Meisner's approach. And the great stumble was Meisner was a pianist. He played piano when he was very young, and training as a musician at the Damrosch Institute, which became Juilliard in New York, and was... This was very early in his life and in his career. So he was in his teens, and he played piano all the way through his life. And one of the things that's interesting, when he became a teacher at the neighborhood playhouse in New York, that school, curiously, had pianos in every room. It wasn't a musical theatre school, and it wasn't a music conservatoire, but as an acting institution that obviously had people doing some singing and some music, every room had a piano. And I think that is fascinating because it brings us into a kind of crossroad between how a musician listens and how an actor listens. And so for me, that was the most powerful thing. The way that Meisner did this is very straightforward. He could see that there were two problems for actors. One was that they were self-conscious, and he thought, how can I solve that? And the other thing was that he noticed that people would pretend to do stuff instead of actually doing it. These two problems he sought to solve. And there were two very simple solutions, but obviously he discovered them over time and over practice with his colleagues and his students. So the self-consciousness was to take the focus off yourself and onto the other actor, so that the other actor in the scene, your scene partner, becomes the most important thing, and you have to give them all your focus. So this comes back to a Stanislavsky principle of observing. You know, we observe the world, we observe how other human beings behave, we're observing the words that they choose, the actions that they make. And so putting your focus on the other actor is not so tricky. The hard part then is this business of pretending. And the one thing that Meisner could see was there is nothing that we get to do on stage as an actor that isn't somehow given to us. So it isn't authentically of us. We have to take it maybe from the playwright, maybe from the designer, maybe from the director. And so in a way, we're being asked to be fake with a lot of the stuff that we do. So that's really tough. How do we get rid of pretending? And Meisner could see that the one thing that we do on stage that isn't fake is to listen to the other actor. And that's the most powerful thing, because you just can't get through a scene without listening to your scene partner. Yeah. So it's a little feedback loop that happens. I send you my focus as my scene partner, and I have to give you my focus because you're going to speak a line, and I have to listen to that line. And the way I prove to you in rehearsal that I've listened to you is I repeat it. And this is where repetition is one of the key principles of Meisner's work, is that if you can repeat back what the other actor said, you prove that you're listening to them, and your focus can never come back to self-consciousness, because that means you've stopped listening because you're worrying about yourself instead of the other actor. So it's a wonderful little feedback loop. And for me, it relates to music. It relates to movement as well, because it's a very embodied process. But this business of the listening actor is fascinating to me, and Meisner's all about it.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's really sort of refreshed my mind, really. Yeah, thank you for that. And I think there's another sort of aspect of Meisner. You know, he sort of, as you say now, it's like a continuation of Stanislavsky, and then there was like two other people who sort of went down similar roads as he did. There was Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg, and then there's a connection of what the method acting like, and what it's really all about. And I feel like the media has sort of distorted what it actually is all about. And I think you know, you're not being Daniel Day-Lewis, you know, go and live in the jungle for 6 months, or walk around New York with a top hat and Bill the Butcher mustache for 3 months prior to filming so you can be in the character. It's like, oh God. But I tried that. I must admit, I did try that once for an audition. I had a Hamlet speech, and I was miserable on the train all the way up to London, thinking like, okay, let's see how this works. And I got to the audition room and I was burnt out. There's no energy left whatsoever. All my energy was gone, and I thought, oh, it's a shame the audition panel wasn't in on the train with me. I had it there, but I don't have it anymore now. But I think there's a lot of, you know, you shouldn't do that, and just don't believe the media sort of distortion. But Meisner sort of came up with an as if. Are you familiar with the term as if? Like, so imagine you're in a scene with a character, and if you can't, if you want to bring something from your own life into the scene, but you can bring something that's not entirely true, but imagine as if someone you love has had an accident, or someone you know has just got that job which they've always wanted, and that will bring the emotion. Is that a safe practice from a acting perspective?
It's interesting because, as you know, Ollie, one of my hats that I wear at Guildford School of Acting is as a wellbeing champion. So I act as a conduit between the Wellbeing Centre with its counsellors and so on, and students and staff in the school at GSA. I'm not a counsellor myself, but I have a great interest in, obviously, the world of performance brings up psychology all the time. And I think we need to be more and more sensitive to this. So, yeah, you're asking a really important question, and it's got a whole lot of history attached to it. And it's true, what you're saying is that they'll beat it up for a good story, rather than necessarily being concerned about the inner life of the actor. I'll try and put a simple frame around it, which is that Lee Strasberg was a member of the group theatre in the 1930s in America, and he would be thought of now as the sort of grandfather of method acting. He learned what he knew about Stanislavsky's system, and I'll call it a system rather than a method,
Yeah.
Stanislavsky's system is sprawling, and it takes quite a bit of looking at all of the different angles that you can find about it. But Strasberg learned Stanislavsky's work secondhand from a pair of Russian emigres to America called Boleslavsky and Uspenskaya, and they opened the American Laboratory Theatre in the 1920s, and that's where Strasberg studied. And so he took the Stanislavsky idea that we can use our own emotions and our memory of our own experience, which is a fascinating one. Mm-hmm. But he took this idea, which was one of Stanislavsky's experiments, if you like, and Strasberg took this idea and really ran with it and developed it in a very, very deep and thorough way. The tricky thing for me is that I push it to its extreme and say, well, hang on, if I have to play an axe murderer, I'm not going to go out with an axe and start killing people. So and of course, I know there will be some Strasberg practitioners who will say, oh, well, that's just being, that's being too crass about it. But you can understand that there's a logic here that we need to follow. So what you've just described in terms of Meisner sort of turning away from this idea that we only use our own experiences and our own memories, which is valid. We know this from, there were psychologists asking questions about this from the 19th century. We could reliving our experiences, and we know more and more now with brain science and physiology that we hold experiences in the body. That it's biological, it's physiological. But the question, as you say, is it safe to unlock this stuff in a rehearsal room? Well, if the safe space is created, yes. But my question, as was Meisner's question, is this a professional necessity? Do we have to do it that way? Are there other ways? And Meisner, and you mentioned Stella Adler as well. Stella was also very interested in how can we use imagination to take us into those places where we've known nothing like the experience of our character. We've never been anywhere near our character's current moment. And so how can we use other sensations, other imaginary processes to take ourselves there? So I'm very, very clear with students about that we're not doing method acting when I'm in a room with them. Although Meisner, Adler, they get lumped in with Strasberg as part of the American method, the thing that differentiates Adler and Meisner from Strasberg is that they were interested in what are the imaginative options. And you described, and it's the most contentious of Meisner's ideas, that you take something that is of your experience. So, for example, I have a brother, but I don't have a sister. So there's no point choosing my sister because she doesn't exist. So I would choose my brother. And then I might say, he's won the lottery. So how do I feel for my brother knowing that his winning ticket is going to make him a millionaire? And so that actually, even saying that, makes me feel excited. Yeah. But it is contentious. If I don't have a great relationship with my brother, which I do, I would not want to put somebody in my real life into a very negative situation if that was not appropriate. Mm-hmm. And it's the one area that Meisner called emotional preparation. And when we look at the Meisner work, I would agree it's the most contentious part of Meisner's work because it feels a little bit like the Strasberg use your own experiences. And so I offer it to students, but I don't necessarily use it on a regular basis. It's there for the student who wants to try it if they feel that they're secure with it. But again, I always come back to this idea of working in a space that is held and supported. So I hope that describes it
does. No, it really does. It really does. That's great. Funny enough, I'm just reminded of that story. You probably know this already, but for anyone who doesn't know, there's an amazing story when Laurence Olivier, I think, did his final film. I think it was Marathon Man, and Dustin Hoffman, I think, studied with Strasberg, or was fully immersed in the Strasberg method way of doing things. And in Marathon Man, I haven't seen the film, well, in its entirety, but I think I get a basic gist of what it was all about. Laurence Olivier played, I'm not going to assume, but anyway, but the two of them were in this film together. And the two characters, Olivier is playing like a medical man, and you've got Dustin Hoffman who's playing like his patient. There's people out there who've probably seen the film thinking I'm getting this entirely wrong, but just bear with me. And Hoffman comes in, and his character is on the page, says he's supposed to have been awake for 3 days, hasn't had a shower, he hasn't cleaned himself, he's just been there. And so that's what Dustin Hoffman did. He turned up, hadn't showered for 3 days, hadn't slept for 3 days, sat there looking totally miserable and totally just in pieces. And Olivier comes in and goes, "Dear boy, what's happened? I feel so bad for you." And it's like, "Yeah, I know, it's just the work. It's really beat me up." I said, "Why? Well, why's the work beating you up?" He said, "Yeah, because the character is supposed to be awake for 3 days, hasn't washed, and I have to live the part." He said, "Live the part?" He said, "Yeah, I have to live the part to get to the truth." And Olivier steps back and goes, "Dear boy, why don't you try acting? It's so much easier." and that really stuck with me. And
classic story, I love it.
yeah, why don't you try acting? It's so much easier.
Again, Olivier comes from a world where you ask, what's your great secret to a warm up, and the answer may come from an actor of his generation. "Oh, I don't know, a cigar and a brandy should do it."
Oh, dear. So funny enough, I just want to really quickly touch on the next question. One of from our classes, I remember you talking about when you discovered the website Pinterest, and where you create storyboards for characters and things like that. And I remember you saying, "Oh, I was so excited when I first discovered Pinterest. I imagine a whole website dedicated to Harold Pinter." And then you realized it was just a website full of images. And I was like, "Oh, if only there was one." But
well, I did say that to one colleague, and she said, "Oh, I couldn't think of anything worse."
Oh no, the work. I just want to quickly touch on Harold Pinter, and because I'm a huge fan of his work, and we were talking about the beats and stuff earlier, and you have the Pinter pause, etc. But I love the stories about. I've mentioned this a few times. If my very first episode of this podcast was with Harry Burton, who was Pinter's sort of best friend for many, many years, and acted with him, wrote with him, just did everything. And and he told this story that he worked with Pinter works with Ayckbourn on his play The Birthday Party, I think in the 60s. And Alan Ayckbourn shows up, and he's got all these questions. He said, "Harold, what's their motivation in the scene? Where does my need? What's my objective, or something like that? What do these characters do? Where have they come from?" And Pinter just sat back and just said, "Mind your own fucking business. It's all in the text." and I thought that was brilliant. So yeah, how do you tell me about your love for Pinter as well, and your interest in his plays?
I think that is a sort of sideline of things of what I think of as the musicality of theatre. For me, as a musician, the structure of his scenes feels like a musical score. So when the choices are being made to put a particular length of line or a one-word thought onto the page, it feels they feel like musical phrases. Now, I would say this is true for many, many writers, not just Harold Pinter. But I think the turning point in British theatre that Pinter represents is that he understood rest and silence, which from a musical point of view is so fascinating, because rest can mean in music that the music has repose. It lays back and it feels comfortable. But there are times when a rest actually makes us go, "Oh, this is alarming. Why has the music stopped? Why has why have the words stopped?" And so this question of subtext comes up with the pause. So there are some things that we know on the page. When we look at the score, we see the comma and we think, well, okay, that has a grammatical effect. We see the full stop and we know that that's leading us to the end of a thought. we see that a dash could indicate that we're being interrupted, or maybe we're interrupting ourselves. So there's a different kind of pausing or stopping there, arresting. And then we see that there's 3 dots, the ellipsis. And how long is an ellipsis, and what does that mean? And the thought is still there. Think about the thought bubbles that come out of a cartoon character's mind, the little dots that come out before the bubble. And then we see something a little longer, like the word pause gets used. And so Pinter will say pause. And that's fascinating, because we think, well, how long is that? And what does it mean, you know?
Mm.
And then finally, he will use the word silence. And the how long is a silence, but then what is the space of a silence? What is its shape? What is its sound? So the great modern composer John Cage wrote a whole book called Silence, which is kind of like it's like a scrapbook of thoughts and images, because John Cage asked the question, you know, can we really have a silence? Is there any such thing as being able to stop all sound? But again, I'll say, as a musician, all sound is motion. While ever the human body is in vibration, we will always be making sound. John Cage it was in the 1950s, he went to Harvard University because it was like a recording studio with they called it an anechoic chamber, as in a room that has no echoes. It was fully soundproofed. And so John Cage is in this room and he says to the engineer, but I can hear sounds. And the engineer says, yeah, what are they? He said, well, there's a really high-pitched whining. And the engineer says, yeah, that's your nervous system. Wow. And John Cage says, well, and there's a really low-end rumble that I can hear. And the engineer says, yep, that's your blood circulating through your body.
Wow.
So when we ask this question of what is a silence, can we have a silence? If we were quiet enough, we could hear the other side of the planet. We could hear the other side of the universe, because there would still be, things would still be in motion. Life would still be happening. So I find this, this relationship to text, to music, to listening, to what do playwrights put on the page. I love the sort of metaphysical questions that Harold Pinter offers when he just says silence.
yeah, especially like you've seen the Dumb Waiter. Yeah, and that, I won't give it away, but there's a certain thing which happens right at the very end, and that silence is just eerie. It's like, how has this happened? And like, you can, like, and as you were saying, the metaphysical stuff, like, you only not something you become very aware of your own heartbeat and your own sort of circulation of your thoughts, thinking, how the fuck is this happen? Honestly. And that's amazing. And I want to go into this room. I want to hear my nervous system. I want to hear my
well, it does happen if you've had one or two too many drinks and you lie down in a very quiet bedroom.
Very true. Very true.
You're here through the pillow. That's the ringing in the ears after a big night.
You speak like a man of experience in that department. We all have. We all been there. That was fantastic. So, so in terms of like engaging with the scene partner, I know you've already talked about this with the Meisner technique, and I think to sort of clarify that it's not just like project. I think, you know, I know you've talked about this, but you're not like projecting yourself or looking really intensely at your scene partner. Would it be fair to say it's all about to engage? All you have to do is just listen and just accept what they're saying.
Accept is a really good word. When we are ourselves, we accept the other self that's there with us. You know, there they are doing their thing. Yes, we're not judging or sort of investigating or probing. We're just watching the other human being. And I suppose from a listening perspective, it's like we're a big ear where our whole self is listening to the person. Our eyes become a listener. Our breath, we breathe in the other actor. As soon as we step into this funny old thing called character, which is still us, and yet it's not, As soon as we step into character, there's this question of what we're perceiving from the other person's behavior in relation to what we have a responsibility to, because we know they're not my needs, they're my character's needs, but I have to make them my own needs. So I have to really that's where I might start to observe in a maybe more judgmental way. Maybe I'm curious about the other character that I'm working with. But if we can't find this in ourselves before we go to the playwright's work, we're in trouble. And I think that's where it's important that we can be open to these kinds of ideas when we're in training, because what we're really trying to do is train our own instincts. Yeah, we're not trying to force something. We're accepting these are the circumstances of the character. So now, I'm not only me, I am also responsible for these other things that I have to accept, and seeing in my scene partner how they behave in relation to that. That's my job as the actor, is to take that on board.
Yeah, and that's great. And another aspect is actioning, and I know that this is something that I think depends from actor to actor in a way. So when they go through the script, and again with the rabbit hole experience, you say on this line, what's the name of that guy? As sort of made more sort of commonly known by Max Stafford Clark, who talks about actioning, and every line he's saying, right, I'm enveloping you, or I'm sharpening you, or I'm constructing you. I'm probably not a great example, but but with every line, and it's like, this is my action, and this is what I want to do in a way. So how would you describe actioning, and how is it for everyone, do you think, or should everyone do it, or is it really just a case of each actor prepares a little bit differently to the other?
Well, we're on the other end of the spectrum from where we were talking about the method. I mean, I think there's no right or wrong or correct way for any actor to train. Where good trainings offer up opportunities, they immerse people in experiences, and ultimately we're hoping that across a 3 to 1 year training, that the student actor is beginning to build their own process, so that once they're out of drama school, they feel confident that they've got not pick and mix, but a tool bag that is useful and gives them some through line for their process. Gosh, there's a few things there. So Stanislavsky, when he first set up the system, Moscow Art Theatre was doing quite nicely up until the early 1900s, because they kind of had an external process that was, instead of just being a star actor and walking all over the writer's text, they didn't really care much about the writer's words. They would kind of extemporize, but if you were the famous star, you'd come down the front and speak out to the audience. And of course, Stanislavsky changed all of that. He said, actually what we need to do is observe human behavior, and we need to do physical things that show the real life of the character. And that's great, because it was an external way of looking at how can we prepare the actor from the outside to be able to become the character. But it's about 1906 that he's in a show saying, but I don't feel anything. We're getting standing ovations for what we're doing on the outside. So this is, he famously goes and sits on a rock or a bench, depends who did the translation. It's probably a rock for the Soviets and it's a bench for the Americans. It's like he had a moment of going to the mountain, as it were, to look into his soul. And this is where he comes back to the Moscow Art Theatre with the system, which is really an internal process, and it's about what's going on inside for the psychology of the character. It's where we get our round the table script analysis. Our text analysis process comes from the system, and there were 4 banners that he hung in the rehearsal rooms. So he wanted relaxation, which is important to get rid of tensions that are unnecessary. He wanted given circumstances to be very important, because we've got to know who are these characters that we're dealing with, what are their circumstances. He wanted focus because he wanted to bring people, as I was mentioning in the Meisner work, to bring the actor's focus into story and connection. And the fourth of these banners was action. And it's been much spun over decades, this idea of action. There are some actor trainings in which there is very little attention to anything to do with what we've just spoken about with the method, or this kind of halfway house that I've mentioned with Meisner technique. But some actor trainings will deal only with actioning. So you learn your lines, you choose an action for each line, you play the action from a physical point of view on your scene partner, and if you can see that it changes them, it affects them in a deep way, then we say, okay, there it is, that's actioning. For many practitioners, this is a slightly dry way to work and a slightly intellectual way to work. So I completely understand. I'm not selling any particular thing here as I talk these things through. I respect them all. Yeah. But the idea of an action is a transitive verb, so a verb that I can do something to the other actor and see that it has had an impact. So I think you used something like to spike or stab. Now, when we're not going to hurt the other actor, it's acted aggression, but the spiking or the stabbing is there, and the other actor responds because they've felt spiked or stabbed. Mm-hmm. And you can see that a transaction has taken place. You wouldn't use the word love, for example, yes? Because to love is not a transitive verb because you can't sort of do it physically and you can't see a response from it. So we're looking for transitive verbs for that. I find it's useful for some students when they feel like they're inside themselves too much and they want to come out of themselves in order to engage with the other actor. But for some student actors, it doesn't do as much for them as the business of listening to the other actor and drawing in. You mentioned colleagues at GSA. Jack Bessel at GSA, several years ago in one of her workshops, I heard her use the terms being on send and being on receive. And I think they're terrific because the Meisner work, the listening, is about being on receive. But when we choose to do some actioning on a text, we are on send, and it forces us to say, what am I trying to do to the other actor in the scene?
Fascinating stuff. I think that really, really does help, just the process of listening and I think all three could actually like intertwine into one process in a way. I'm probably just speaking for myself here, but if there are some blocks and you're struggling to find the key to that particular lock, each one of those three things can help in a way. So it doesn't have to be all one thing or the middle thing or the third thing. For example, you can have like a mixture of all three, which goes into the overall experience, which really, really does help massively. So there's always a way in. I think as a director yourself, when it comes to, because we talked about the text analysis, but when it comes to creating a world, so if you're being produced with ideas for set and the visual elements of the play in a way, where do you, what's the first and last thing that you sort of look at in terms of creating a world, but like specifically for stage, and where do you begin and where do you want to finish in terms of creating the visual aspects of the show?
Yeah, I think we have to come back to the writer's words, unless, of course, we're devising a piece, which is slightly different. But the text analysis that I would do as an actor, as an acting teacher, I would also do as a director. So looking at what does the writer require of this piece. You're asking the really fundamental actor questions like who, what, where, when, why, how. And those things, if you keep asking those questions, you get solutions from the text and from the page. The one big part of my training at NIDA in Sydney as a director was the deputy director of NIDA at the time was Peter Cook, who has since gone on to run Carnegie Mellon University's drama department. And Peter was also the head of design at NIDA for many, many years. And he had a great influence on that institution and on the directors who came through the directing course. And Peter would always say, don't think of it as set or costume. Think of it as a world. Think of it as the world of the play. And what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? Who are these people that inhabit it? So it goes back to what we were saying earlier about not making assumptions about it, working from the text and pulling out the clues that the playwright is giving along the way. So when we start to talk about the visual aspects of a production, these are people. They're not characters. They're wearing clothes, not costumes. They inhabit spaces that might be interior, exterior spaces. They're not on a set. So we have to deal with the real world first. We might be doing a naturalistic drama, but we might be doing something that's far more abstract, far more expressionist, for example. I think the same principle applies. We have to deal with who are these human animals, they're all animals, and how are they inhabiting? What are the spaces they inhabit, and what are their interactions? So when I'm working with a designer, the conversations are about real world things, and a good designer will bring reference images from the world of the play. They might be historical things. They could be much more expressive things that come from to do with sensation and emotion. But that part of the design process there, when we say words like mood board, when we put together a kind of collection of images for a character or for an environment that the characters will inhabit, that's where we're in a really important transaction. That it's the same principle as I was saying about the actor on the first day of rehearsal. If we leap to opening night and we don't give ourselves the opportunity to experience and express during that process, we might as well just call rent a set and say, I'm doing this play, please deliver it. And then there's no process at all. Again, pragmatically, if you've got a day to rehearse something and it's on tomorrow night, I'm going to call rent a set.
Yeah, we need you now.
If I know that opening night is 3 months away, I can take at least the first month, because I'm still not at rehearsal 1 yet, in order to deepen that experience. And then slowly we know what the room is or the environment. I mean, we might be performing in a forest, we might be performing in a West End theatre, then we start to say, okay, so what are the parameters here? How can we put this world we've created into this space at GSA or wherever we might happen to be working? And then we're not constrained by the idea, oh, it has to fit that space. Oh, it must fit that budget. If we start with the restrictions of the space and we've only got 10 quid, we will never go anywhere creatively. But if we say we have unlimited budget, unlimited options, we're going to come up with a very interesting idea, a solid idea that is tested against every important moment in the play. And then when we're told we've got about 100 quid to do this, we don't suit the idea to the money. The money then suits the idea. So we keep the big idea, but we only have 100 quid to spend on it. And that to me is a much more exciting way of working. I can't bear it when a production meeting starts with, we've only got 50 quid, so you better not expect much. That is not the beginning of a design process.
You're just sat there thinking, oh no, here we go again. No. We need to create the set. We need to be visual.
We need to make the thing. We need to have the idea and have the world of the play very clear, because we will know how to spend that 50 quid. And a good designer will know, yes, that's essential. It has to say this. We must have this. And then we spend the 50 quid really well to make a beautiful statement about the play, as opposed to saying, oh, we didn't have much money, so you're going to have to look at this ugly sofa for the next 3 hours.
Oh, wonderful. Isn't that great? Oh, I wonder what, because I know we created like a spine of a set for Rabbit Hole, but it would have been so cool just to put it in like the Bel Airs or patch with the theatres on Surrey campus and just create that world and see what else we could have done with it in a way. I
Yeah,
think.
Ollie, I should say that for that part of our process, I deliberately chose a designer and director's ideas that had come to a kind of ground plan, because that's usually where the actors meet it. Unfortunately, you can't get hired to go through the design process with, I mean, there are companies in the world that do that, but oftentimes we come to the first design presentation and we see the model box and we go, oh wow,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is the environment we're good. And but that's had many months of thought and care by the director and the designer before the actors look into the model box. And then we see costume renderings, and of course there's that word again, costume. In the real world, we only ever wear a costume when we're, dressing up for a fancy dress party. But the characters in the play are wearing their own clothes. So we look then at how a designer has imagined our body in particular garments. And sometimes that surprises us. So I always ask actors to be very sensitive to the other artist's work. When they go for a fitting at wardrobe, choose your words carefully. Yes. When you see a grey shirt hanging on a rack and it's yours, rather than using the words, it's a drab shirt, choose the words, it has muted tones, because that's kinder to the other artist. It's very concerning when a student actor walks into wardrobe and says, well, I'm not wearing that because it's ugly. And you think, ooh,
No,
they're not the words to be using.
don't do that. Don't do that.
Because we're trying to negotiate with the other artist who has a conception of this character, and it is often strange because for the actor in the rehearsal room, we may not have had a sort of bridge into the conversations that the director and the designer have had, and that's where the pragmatism comes back. This is the costume, that's what you're wearing, and we have to find, okay, how can we then, by seeing the garment, it's going to change our thoughts about how we will wear it. Putting it on our body will change how we wear, how we behave. The shoes we wear, the collar on a shirt or a dress. So these things are always made. They're always made part of the creative process and the professional process of having the conversation with the other artists who are involved.
Yeah, amazing stuff. It's so because we're doing a show, and in 2 weeks, in fact, we'll be in Widows on in Pat's, and we saw the box 3 weeks ago, and it was like, wow, exactly as you said it. It was like, oh my god, wow, this looks so cool. And then we went to the workshop last week to check it out, and no, this week, yeah, we saw it very recently to check it out, and it was just like, oh wow, okay. And then and I think the really exciting bit is when you see it all in the theatre and it's all put together, and you start to rehearse with it, and then suddenly all these new ideas just start coming up, and the world of the play starts to become a lot more visceral as well as just realistic. I know that's probably not the best word to use, but it's there. It becomes alive. That's better. It becomes alive right there in front of you, which is great.
It's tangible, it's physical, and you have to relate to it in a very practical way.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just got 2 more questions for you today, Andrew. So actually 3. We'll start with this one. It's just a very quick one. We talked about music and stuff today. Who is your favorite composer?
Oh Lord, that's putting me up against the wall. It depends where you mean. If you're talking musical theatre, I'm in the world of Stephen Sondheim, but certainly I love a good Jerry Herman tune in a musical theatre piece. I adore his songs. But then, gosh, your Cole Porters, your Gershwins, that's all the classic musical theatre tunes. If we're in the world of so-called classical music, there's such a range of people. But in contemporary classical music, I still really enjoy. There's 2 Americans. Philip Glass would be one, and John Adams, who's kind of generation younger, but John Adams has some awesome orchestral music. Which, when I think about the world of composers that slightly bridge into what would be American film music as well, there's really interesting. It's hard for me to pin down single names.
Yeah. Good. And but what about the classics of classics, like your Mozart and Beethoven? Could you like,
Yeah. Look, I always, in my music degree, I always railed against this. What I loved was the kind of Renaissance and Baroque period. So lots of composers that people don't necessarily know the names of, like Machau and Josquin Dupré and Orlando de Lasso. So in that kind of Renaissance period, and then you get into the Baroque composers. The early Baroque is interesting. Once we get into Monteverdi and Bach, yeah, interesting stuff. But I've always been at that sort of pre-classical end, and then the kind of 20th century. I do actually love some really quite tough to listen to 20th century music, the stuff that was really quite out there. But I love these extremes. I have grown to love more and more of the Mozart piano concertos, and of course Mozart's great work was the operas. I mean, that's the pinnacle of his work, and he was somebody who knew how to take a play, because a lot of them are adaptations, how to take a play and turn it into a piece of music theatre. And so, yes, Marriage of Figaro, which was the Beaumarchais play. Don Giovanni, extraordinary. But these are, for me, they're pieces of theatre rather than thinking of them as music. Mm-hmm. The opera people would hate me for saying that, because opera is such a music-based art form. But I can't not think of opera as it has to be great theatre, because it's telling the story through the theatre medium.
Yeah, but you've been involved in opera. You've directed operas, though, right?
Yeah, but it is always a tension. I know it's a tension, particularly for the singing actor in that situation. Again, I had a wonderful production manager on one opera that I did, where they would always call through the shout mic, actors standing by, and eventually one of the cast members stopped and said, "Please don't call us actors, we're singers." And I thought, oh, ouch, yes, there it is. Because my view is, if you step onto a stage, even if you consider yourself an opera singer, quote unquote, I'm sorry, my friend, but you've become an actor, because you're stepping into the theatre space. So simple things that we might do as actors, and what musical theatre students will do all the time, is they love the physical challenge while they're singing. But often you will find that there are people in opera contexts who are a little more concerned about what they do physically, because they know that it will affect the voice. And that's where you're in that edge of, it's a music art form, because they want it to sound as brilliant as it can, and they don't want to sacrifice that by doing cartwheels or hanging upside down.
Oh my goodness. I do have another question that came in now, but we've just got a few more left before we finish today. But when you come to composing stuff, in my brain, I can't even think about, because there have been so many different variations of all kinds of different rhythms and different melodies and stuff like that. Like, how do you compose something without you sort of trodding on territory like this melody's all been written before? But how can you create something new? And indeed, how do you look at like a ballet or a routine, and just is it all about just hearing a tune in your head and then just knowing like which chord segment is the right, or just basic improvisation and just hope that you remember what you've done? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think there's a series of vocabularies which, as you've done stuff over time in a certain domain, you go, oh yeah, well, I get harmony and how that could work and what the possibilities are. The rhythm of things is so important. Where is their pulse? Where do things go twice as fast, twice as slow? All of the relationship to a tempo, the phrase and the contour of a melody. I love all of that. That to me comes from always being interested in singing, always being interested in how words are set to music. That for me is a fascinating area, because that you get the rhythm of the text, but then you're getting the pitch contour. I mean, it's the one thing an actor has to do, is be their own composer. You don't have a Mozart to set all of the playwright's words to music. You don't get told your rhythm and your melody. So in fact, in some way, an actor's work is like a composer. You're having to set the words to a particular tempo and a shape and a melodic contour of your voice. So I think that's how I come at composition from an improvisatory point of view, knowing what the vocabularies are that I want to use. And so, yes, if I'm playing for a dance class and I'm improvising, it's exactly that kind of work.
Yeah. I mean, I really want to learn the piano at some point in my life, because it's just such a beautiful instrument and everything. But yeah, that's definitely on the bucket list for me. And like, you've completely sold it to me right now about everything there. And just promise me and my group that you will play the piano for us. I'm going to get this on camera now, to get this on record. Can you please promise us that you will show us your piano skills, even if it's just 30 seconds? Please just show us some of what you can do.
I'd be happy to. Last term, one of my colleagues, Rachel Kerridge, she teaches ballet at GSA on a regular basis, and that we've kept been trying to make our timetables intersect so that I could come into one of her ballet classes and just play for the class, because she's always on her iPod and ticking through the tracks, which is great. But it would be lovely just to have an hour of ballet one morning where we could just be colleagues working together. She sets the exercise and I improvise the music. Sometimes I work from scores as well, but it's just, for me, it's an interesting, there's an interesting dynamic, music and movement, and the connection of text to music. I've always found these things, they're kind of little Venn diagrams where things intersect in artistic life.
Yeah. Great. Well, we've got that on camera now. We've got it on record. So yeah, but that sounds amazing. And just finally, it's kind of two questions in one, really, but I think this is a lovely sort of place to finish, is when you go to the theatre now with friends or family, and you see a play which you haven't seen before, or a play you have seen before, can you, I think, and I sort of have this as well, but did you have this, are you able to switch off I'm just coining this phrase, your director brain? Like, can you switch it off and just enjoy the night of the theatre? Or can you relax when you watch a show? Or are you constantly like, okay, that's a good position for that chair, that's a good position for that act, okay, their listening's very good, no, their listening's not very good, they don't doing anything. It's like, it's like, are you able to switch that off and enjoy a night of the theatre? Or does it always sort of creep in?
It's an interesting question, because I always say in training that the actor has to get out of the audience and get on stage, because as student actors, we love watching other people's work, but we have to know when we have to be on stage rather than be in the audience. I don't see it as cut and dried as that. I feel like part of my theatre going experience is to enjoy the richness of what all those artists have put into the piece. And I feel like I go to theatre because I know it's a piece of artifice. But what's lovely is when it takes you into, as I say, a world, and that world is consistent and it has its own internal logic, and it takes you down, pathways you never expected. That for me is what's thrilling. And I don't think, as professionals, we ever really turn off that technical part of ourselves, because it isn't siloed. It's not separate from our expressive life and our enjoyment of things. The techniques that we learn and we develop over a career, they are the engine room for our expression as an artist. Yeah. So I enjoy absorbing that when I go to the theatre, because I'm sensing that and feeling that from another group of artists.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's always that feeling of, okay, well, what are they doing? Well, what they're doing this, or maybe I could use that. But I think it's also good to sort of have that sort of detachment and say, and just watch the work and just think, okay, I'm in the audience tonight. When I'm on stage next, then I can sort of apply secretly what I'm taking in here. secretly in the background. And just one final question today is, what's been an experience that you've had at the theatre and anywhere in the world that you've never forgotten?
Gosh, I will probably go back to things like the Philip Glass operas that have been staged at the ENO. In the 1990s, I'd always wanted to see. Philip Glass has a trilogy of operas: Einstein on the Beach, Akhenaten, and Satyagraha. And I've not yet seen Einstein staged. I wanted to many years ago, but I've seen productions of the other two, and they're not short and they're not a simple watch or listen, but I love the fact that they take you into a kind of meditative space, because the story evolves over a long period of time, and in some ways they're using the theatre of image, so it needs to be staged, even with Philip Glass's amazing music, but also they're contemplating, as the titles would say, three historical figures that are quite powerful in terms of their ideas for the world, whether they're scientific, spiritual, political. And I do enjoy theatre that takes you into that world. Again, you're asking me to pin down a single thing, but in terms of,
if there's more than one, then feel free to say more than one.
well, it's what puts me in mind of it, because we're talking about groups of artists bringing things together. So the theatre director Peter Sellers, who worked with John Adams, the composer I mentioned earlier, there's a similar thing going on there with a team of artists, and I love this idea that collaborative work can bring, particularly in theatre that has music in it, that we don't say that the top artist is the composer, that in fact the music is part of the drama, is part of the design, is part of the director's concept, and that the director isn't some auteur in that way. It's a coordinator of all these artists. And the more holistic the work can become, the more that we go to that place that you're mentioning, where we don't notice the mechanics of the theatre being made. We just can, we can step into a sort of a trance-like state as the theatre just envelops us.
Yeah, amazing. I'm really interested to see what these pieces are. Einstein on the Beach. It's an image I never thought I'd ever see, but I'm just getting an image now, him in his full suit and everything. That's amazing, Andrew. Thank you so much. Today has just been so informative, and it's just been so nice just to relearn everything from you again, and I speak on behalf of myself and the rest of the group, who were with you for those 6 to 7 weeks doing Rabbit Hole, and everyone in that group, we speak so highly of you, and we are so very, very honored and very touched that you would share your passion, your desire, and everything that you love about this business and your music and everything with us, and your love for the play as well. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that when we look at a copy of Rabbit Hole in the future, or indeed see it being potentially staged in town, we will look at it and think of yourself and just love, and just reminded of all the love that you brought into the room and the safe space you created. And I think just want to say just massive, not only thank you for today, but just thank you for just sharing your love and just being you, and just being so passionate about everything that you do. And just so thank you for that.
Thank you, Ollie. That's really kind. I've had a terrific time working with your group of MA actors, MFA actors, because it's been such a responsive group of people, and people who've really looked out for one another and cared for one another in the workspace. And I think that's the frame of fiction can't happen without the professional base that it stands on, and I think that's been a wonderful thing for your group as you've gone through your training. So, and thank you for today. Thank you for the invitation again. It's been great.
Oh, my pleasure was all mine, honestly. And it's a real credit to yourself with your professionalism, and again your love for everything. And And I think that is a lovely place to call it a day. So if you just hang on after I finish the recording, I'll say goodbye to you one-on-one. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been the Uncensored Critic podcast, and I will be back very soon. Once again, Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ollie.